Welcome to the First Mentor podcast. Here, you will hear us talk about a variety of topics for the entire family that will hopefully spark a discussion, create a new curiosity, or simply teach you something new. The goal is to inspire you to learn life skills and soft skills not taught in school and prepare you to live an extraordinary life. Come on and spend some time with us on your commute to school or anytime you're free.
Welcome to the First Mentor podcast. This is your host, Vanessa Yang, and you're joining us today for episode 15. Well, I can't believe how time flies. We're sure having fun speaking and sharing some information with you. And in our last podcast, I mentioned to you that we will continue with part 2 of our discussion with my good friend, Drew Hayashida, on how to succeed in a corporate environment. So last time, Drew shared a lot of great information with us, and here is our continued conversation. Hope you enjoy it. Make sure at the end, or even now if you'd like, add us to your favorite list or subscribe to us so that you will not miss an episode that's coming up. And we'll go right into part 2. Enjoy. And I wanted to go back to maybe on the first few days, right? When you first start your work. Have you noticed anything? I mean, you probably just mainly meet the person during orientation, right? I feel like there's some common sense item that sometimes are not as common sense that I wanted to cover really quick, like being on time. Starting.
Right.
Especially when you're new and people don't know you yet. Have you seen people like, for example, arrive late at orientation or for interviews or what have you, and the impression it makes?
Absolutely. It depends on how egregious things are, but I mean, if someone comes in late or their behavior is not great, that's something that I would tell my boss, and I would say not very often. I would say maybe 2 people or 3 people. They'd contact the department, and just like, hey, letting you know, their first day was not, this is the behavior we noticed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up to them, whether what they want to do with that information. But you do have an opinion of that stuff if people are just late, and it's kind of a sign of disrespect. It's one thing if you're brand new, if it's like your first day or something, like, okay, you're
Mm-hmm.
learning traffic and the train system, whatever it is. But if it becomes a habit, if it becomes something that is consistent, that does give a negative impression on that employee for sure.
Mm-hmm. And what I wanted to add for is this: if it's your first day, give yourself extra time because you don't know how long the commute takes. Because you don't know, parking is another situation. I don't know about other parts of the country, but LA for sure. And if there's not parking is not provided or the structure is full, it could take you 15, 20 minutes just to circle around and look for parking. So since you don't know, always give yourself an extra 30 minutes. That's what I would recommend, to be on time, because it makes that impression. But let's say something happens and there's a car accident and the whole freeway is blocked and you just can't move. It's about communication. So make sure you have an email or a phone number if you can, and at least say, I'm stuck, I'm going to be late. At least they know and they don't have to wonder what happened to you. So it all circles back to having good communication skills.
That, in fact, that happened all the time, especially, obviously LA, the traffic situation is kind of always bad.
True.
And there's a lot of people who are relocations, they lived in New York or some other state, and, they don't know the pattern that well. Or like you said, there's an accident on the 5 or whatever it is. And they would often contact their HR person, and the HR person would contact us, letting Julie's going to be a little bit late. So they got stuck in traffic. I'm like, well, okay, great. That's really not a problem. Ever.
Exactly. It's not. Yes. That's why I want to make sure it's just how you communicate to it, because if you don't say anything, that it could become one.
Yeah, I'd much rather get a heads up like, hey, I'm going to be, even if it's just 5 minutes before the program starts, I'm going to be like 15, 20 minutes late. Got it.
Mhm.
That's all I need to know. We know that you're going to be here, and your HR person needs to know that you're going to be here. All that stuff is really important. So day one, for sure, like give yourself more time, but at the same time, stuff happens. It's
Exactly.
just part of it. That's okay. But yes, communication, that actually is a great impression. It's like, hey, look, I'm being responsible. Wonderful.
Mhm. And the other thing I wanted to touch upon now, I don't know about from what you've seen, but one of the things I wanted to mention is note taking or lack of. So when we train, we take time out of our schedule to train you. And I think what my tip is really when you go into a meeting, especially in the beginning, always have a pen and a notebook ready to take notes. So I've had this conversation with fellow managers a few times already, and we all shared the same observations. When we ask ourselves, why do some of the new hires just not take notes? I mean, we know they're younger and probably have better memories. At the end of the day, it's probably just best practices to bring a notebook with you and a pen in the meetings or training scenarios because you don't know what you're going to go over and what you need to write down, right? And double checking your work is also another person. Like when people submit things back to the manager and there's common spelling mistakes, or there's like in finance accounting, we deal with numbers, right? So there's like simple formula errors. If you would have checked, you knew 5 + 4 is not 16. Something is wrong in the formula. So just check your work quickly. To me, entry level, if you haven't worked in a corporate environment, those are some important points just to think about. And I don't know if they
It's
take notes during orientation.
So I was going to bring that. It's interesting because, and this is how old I am. So when I was doing orientation, back in the early 2000s, tablets weren't really a thing yet.
Mhm.
And then as the years went on and smartphones started to become more popular, we started to see people on their smartphones. So we kind of tell people, hey, don't be texting other people.
Yes.
Make sure you pay attention. So it's also managing that. It's like you want to encourage people to take notes, but also understanding technology. So sometimes, yeah, they could be texting other people. I don't have any control over that.
Mhm.
But we try to encourage people, like if you're going to use your technology, feel free to take notes on your technology, and that's okay. However, in my training classes, we always provided things for them to take notes with.
Mhm.
And once again, allowing for technology. If you need to use your tablet or if you need to use your smartphone, that's okay too. Just don't use it for anything outside of the context of what we're doing here.
Yes. Actually, you make a really good point on technology. I didn't deal with that when I first started my career, but I had entry level staff and interns who came into my team with technology. And it's the impression you make on people. And I want to bring in the word perception because what I've learned at Disney is perception becomes reality. What I mean is, you might have a certain intention, but if the person perceives it in a different way, then they are right, unfortunately, because they're their supervisors or what have you. You might intend just to look at your phone to take notes or do something quickly, but for them, it just means you're not paying attention. So, and they're not going to bother asking or double checking, is this person, is she taking notes or is she texting somebody else or not paying attention or going through social media? So be very careful what you do, how it could be perceived. The other thing, what I've noticed is, I mean, you work and you have the computer in front of you and you can browse here and there. It doesn't mean you have to completely shut down your personal life. Like occasionally during your lunch breaks, or if you have to check your personal email really quickly because of you expecting something, that's okay. But if we had an intern desk which was right outside the VP's office. And she was very perceptive. She would always see what's going on. And one time she came to me, she's saying, your new intern that I've noticed, he's always online every time I walk by,
Wow.
or on the phone every time I walk by. So they see those things. And in their mind right away, it's negative points, right? And they pass it along to the department head or the manager.
Mm.
Well, maybe it was just your bad luck that every time she walked by, you happen to be on the internet. But just be careful. People are watching you. I think that's the point I'm going back to.
It's true. And yeah, perception is huge. Again, I think in any industry, um, your behavior and what you do in the workplace, it does matter. So you raise an interesting point there too, because that person could have just been walking by at the moment that you happen to be
Mm-hmm.
on the internet you had 3 minutes, you're waiting for a report or something. So I
Exactly.
think I'm just going to go shopping on Amazon. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's just you got busted at the wrong time. It's really, really difficult. But the idea is, be conscious of your work environment and of your coworkers and stuff like that, because you all have to interact with each other, and how you feel about each other is important, and what is seen is
Mm-hmm.
important. And just to be cautious of that. It's an age old cliched comment, but it is true. Just because Joe is doing it doesn't mean it's okay for you to do it.
Yes, very good point. Because you might see others do this a lot, and maybe they're lucky or they sit at a different spot or whatever the reason might be. But that's true. Just because Joe is doing it doesn't mean it's okay for you to do it. That's a very good point.
That was a lot. It was like, wow, so and so is doing it. Like, I didn't see so and so do it. I saw you do it.
Yes. It's just a bad luck part. Yeah. So it's very true. The other thing I wanted to talk about is asking questions, especially at the beginning of your career at a company. What are your thoughts on that?
And I have to say that I was guilty of not doing it. When I first moved up to corporate, I was very intimidated.
Mm-hmm.
It was a completely different atmosphere. I was kind of a big fish in a very small pond in the departments I was at Disneyland. But you go up to corporate and it's a new world, and no one knows who you are and they don't know anything. So I was very intimidated because I was around some really smart people, and it was a new industry for me, HR and all that kind of stuff. So it was a learning curve. And I was lucky that I had a boss who was a great mentor and understood the transition challenge. So she often would bring stuff up and just go, "Do you understand what that means?" Or "How
Mm,
are you doing?" And she continued. That's why she was such a great mentor, because she
yes.
checked in on me. She truly, truly was there for me, and I developed this great trust. So it did get to a point where I would just openly go like, "I have no idea what that meant," um, and she was like, "Good." And for the most part, it's almost always good to ask
Mhm.
questions. Here's the nuance of that. If you're in a meeting situation, you don't want to be raising your hand every 5 minutes. That
Agree.
it does become a perception thing once again. Like, does this person not know anything? So you want to weigh that. You want to pick your battles. So write those questions down. Like, I have a question about this, but it doesn't seem to be germane to the meeting that we're having. We're in a flow. So I'm just going to write that question down to ask my boss or ask the leader of that meeting later. Like, I
Mhm.
just have a
Very
few
good.
quick questions. I just want clarification. Is a great word, because it can mean anything. It can mean I don't know, or like, I think I understand what you're saying, but I just need more specific. So if I could just get clarification on a few of the points that you're raising, is that okay? And just quick, like, oh, got it. So write those questions down. I mean, obviously, there are times when absolutely, please, in the meeting space, ask those questions, because chances are somebody else in that meeting might have the same question
Mhm.
too. But
Mhm.
just weigh it. You don't want to be the question person all the time. I know that sounds maybe counterintuitive, but it is true. Once again, we're talking about perception as well as
Mhm.
learning the culture, learning the environment. If I can just talk about that for a
Of
second,
course.
because I feel like it's related. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is I actually asked a few of my professional friends who've been in corporate America for 20, 30 years. And I said, hey, what would your tips be for new people? And that's one of the things they said: ask questions. And I
Mhm.
think in general, great point, ask questions. Just be conscious of when, where, and how you do it. The second thing is, when you first start in any company, in any department, even if it's within that same company, different departments have a
Mhm.
different business culture. Just kind of soak in things first. I know
Agree.
so many times you want to, I know this is for me too. I was eager and I wanted to impress and I wanted to show off all the things I could do and I could really help. Yes, absolutely. But table that for the first like month or so, you know,
Yes.
just soak in like what the business is like, and how things are going, and pay attention to your boss. Again, whether or not that boss is a mentor or not, because sometimes bosses aren't good mentors, and that's the truth.
Yes.
But you want to pay attention to the behavior of your boss. One of the best things my old boss said is, sit when you're at a meeting table, pay attention to the dynamics, not only of what is being said, what they're sharing, because that's important, but also the dynamics. What are they talking about? What is the things that are most important? What are messages you're hearing a lot? The team leader, if you know your VP or director or whatever, the the head of your department, if you get a sense of what their priorities are, your job then is to align everything you do to the priorities that they have. And the only way to learn that is to listen,
Yes,
to
good
pay
point.
attention, and to ask questions. This is a lot. This is so much. And know that you don't have to do that in the first week. It takes time to learn all of these things. Allow yourself that time to learn. I had a great mentor, so it was a little bit easier for me to learn stuff because she would taper me down when I was going crazy, and she would bump me up if she needed a little bit more action from me. But not all mentors are like that, and that's just a fact. So pay attention. So I think all of that stuff is kind of in the same bucket when you
Hmm.
start a new job. It's like, all of listening, paying attention, learning. Always learn, the dynamics of your team and how it aligns. Eventually you get to that big picture stuff where, okay, I have my team within this company. What are we doing to align with the goals of the company? Because
Great.
understanding that, if you have a good leader, that's exactly what they're doing.
Hmm.
And everything you do supports that. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to kind of pay attention to, but that's just it, paying attention, man. As much as doing your job, which, yes, do your job 110%, paying attention, man, paying attention.
Very, very good points. I think I wanted to touch base on a few things that you mentioned because I completely agree with everything you said. First of all, circling back on asking questions, you made a really good point about writing things down. I highly encourage you asking questions because in the beginning, to your point earlier, you want to make a good impression and you want to your leader to feel like you know things, but you don't, and they know that you're asking questions. So if you don't ask questions, then they actually wonder what's going on. So the
That's true.
mentality, I
That's
like,
true.
is the person actually doing their work?
Mm,
Why don't they have any questions? The mentality I always had about asking questions, and it took me a long time to learn, is I'd rather ask now what appears to be a dumb question than
mm,
5 years later, because
mm.
then it really becomes a dumb question. So if I ask now, I have the excuse of being new. But 5 years later, I'm no longer new and it's going to be seen. So just think about it that way.
Great point.
With asking questions, yes, please write them down and have a list of multiple. And maybe if you have a whole page of questions, you could schedule a quick 10-minute meeting just to say, hey, I know I've been trying to learn and I have several questions where and I love how you said clarification. I would love to clarify a few things because I'm a bit confused. Would you mind? And then go through all those questions at that time because that makes a really good impression on your leader. This person's paying attention,
Mm,
he or she is being thoughtful and not coming to interrupt me every 5 minutes. Because there's a really
mm.
fine balance between asking and not asking and when to ask. I'd rather have you ask me all at once in 15, 30 minutes versus we just finished a meeting and you come back 5 minutes again. What was this again? And then you keep interrupting. Another point that I wanted to touch upon that you mentioned earlier, Drew, is at the beginning when you first start to absorb. I think that is such a good point. You want to make a good impression. And sometimes you're like, oh, I have all these ideas. We could do this better or that better. But yes, write that down, wait 3 to 6 months to see if it still applies. Because
Yeah.
chances are you work with really smart people and they probably have thought about that already. But for
Yeah.
one reason or another, they couldn't implement that. And there's a specific reason not to do so. But maybe you have a good point because a fresh pair of eyes is what you bring to the table. But wait a little, absorb, pay attention, write it down if you still have the idea, and then bring that to the table later on. I think that's a really, really good point. And the next topic I wanted to cover, because you mentioned mentor a few times, it seems like you're really lucky to have one. So I wanted to talk about mentorship a little bit. From your experience, your mentor was your manager, right? Have you had others in your
Yeah.
life that you weren't reporting to, or what were your relationships with mentors?
Personally, all the best mentors I've had have been people I work with the exception of one who's still a friend of mine. And he kind of zoomed in out of almost nowhere. He had learned of me because my reputation was very interesting. He became a great mentor to me and a great venting person because he wasn't in my
Those are
department.
great.
And again, yeah, and then we became friends after that. So, I mean, he's still in a very strange way. He still tries to mentor me a little bit here and there. And that's just how he thinks. He's a
Mm-hmm.
problem solver. So if you are kind of talking about stuff, he immediately goes to like, oh, have you tried this? Or have you thought about this? And, he just naturally is that kind of person. But outside of that, it's been my bosses. At Disneyland, I had a couple of great mentors there. Funny, most of my mentors I've created
Mm-hmm.
friendships with later. It just because we developed so much trust. But I'm lucky where I can say for myself and my career, I've had 5 mentors throughout my career that have been hugely influential, who have truly cared about not just my career, but myself
Mm-hmm.
as well. Even one mentor I had a very contentious relationship with. To her, I guess not, I guess I didn't complain to her. I complained to other people about her. So she didn't know that I was really that
Mm-hmm.
upset about stuff. She ended up being such a key component into how I look at my career today. She was one of my last mentors that I had at Disney, and she really kicked me in the pants and when I
Mm-hmm.
needed it. Everyone's different, so it kind of depends on what you respond
Yes.
to and if that person really cares about your career and all that stuff. I very rarely had anybody outside of my immediate department that kind of helped me along in whatever I was doing. So that's my experience, but I know that's not everybody's experience. And I think that's a false expectation to have, that you're going to have more than one. If you have one good
Mm-hmm.
mentor in your life, I think that's
Yes,
huge.
absolutely. What I wanted to share about mentorship, because I've been part of several mentorship programs throughout my life, whether as a mentee in the beginning and then a mentor now. And there are sometimes formal programs, like at Disney, that they had formal programs about matching. You have to apply for it, and then they match you up with a mentor that you meet. You agree on the timing and how frequent and what you discuss and what have you. And I've always been a mentor with nonprofit organizations where I was matched up with somebody outside the company. But then I also have, from my own perspective as a mentee, different mentors throughout my life. And some were my bosses, and some were, I think, others that I just looked up to from different perspectives, because it's actually great to have one that's not in your department and that's not your boss, because
Mhm.
sometimes you might have some challenges dealing with your boss, and it's great to have a sounding board or somebody with an objective opinion to kind of share with you how to navigate those problems that you might encounter. And I've been also to different panel discussions where the topic was mentorship, and one of the things I really remembered is she actually happened to be my department leader at one point. And she said she has 3 different mentors, if I remember correctly, and they're all at the same time, but for different purposes. So one mentor might be
Mm.
for career specific, because that person used to work with her and kind of knew her strengths and weaknesses, her ambitions, and what have you. So career advice came from that person. The other person really helped from a relationship perspective. So because that person was networked so well, so if she ever had a question or wanted to be introduced to somebody, that was the person. And the third one was personal, family, because work-life balance
Hmm.
is always a very important topic. And every time there was a new opportunity for her or a new job, she would go to that person saying, hey, I have this great opportunity, but it would mean, I don't know, more hours, longer commute, greater responsibility, whatever the reason might be. What do you think? So that person would kind of give her both sides of the coins and different opinions on, have you thought about this? It would might impact your family. Let's say you have to move to for your new job, how that would impact the family. And that opened my eyes to saying, oh yeah, that's true. I don't have to have one mentor only who gives me a perspective on everything that's part of my life, but just one mentor for this specific topic or this area, and then a different one for another area. And the other thing is, did interns get mentors? I don't remember.
I mean, that was a fairly recent thing over at corporate Disney as they started
Mm.
mentorship programs. I think individual departments within Disney were doing it already, but it became kind of
I
a
see.
more formal thing. In fact, during my time at corporate Disney, the entire internship program changed dramatically, because the old way of looking at interns is getting a body in there to file, or to
Yes.
do copies, right? And you get coffee for me kind of stuff. And that, and then it was learned that, these
Oh,
interns can
they're so
contribute
smart.
like
So
significant.
smart.
Mhm. And like you said earlier, new eyes, man, fresh eyes, like a lot of these people have been within their department for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and they've been so used to looking at things one way. And when you have somebody who's been out there doing, maybe work elsewhere, and they bring in those fresh ideas. So they start developing programs around that. So mentor
Hmm.
mentee things, and also giving assignments to interns that are going to help them in their careers. And also, it does put a good message like, hey, if you work for us, you may want to come back. That kind of stuff. It's now a more formal thing. I think a lot of companies are doing that now, where it's a more formal mentorship program
Hmm.
within the company. But certainly for Disney, NBC Universal was doing some great work in that
Yeah.
regard too.
And
So,
and
yeah.
let's say you work for a company that doesn't have it. Doesn't mean you can't go look for one. So if you attend, I don't know, certain meetings, town halls, panels, discussion, I mean, be very careful who you reach out for. So if you're an intern who is brand new, has no work experience, don't go to the CEO of the company and say, please mentor me. Be very careful in that sense, but maybe somebody who's just a few years ahead of you, somebody who might have been an intern before, and just reach out to them to say, I've been, paying attention to you, and you were an intern before, and then you became a full-time employee. So I would love to learn from you if you could guide me how to achieve that. Because what I said earlier about the CEO is not something I made up. We had an intern. I don't know if he was an urban legend, but at the segment I worked for, he actually reached out to the chairman of the segment. And I was like, wow, that was gutsy. Even when I was a manager or senior manager, I didn't have the guts to reach out to him. So, and I forgot if this person wanted a meet and greet or a mentorship, but became famous. And the chairman was like, what does he want from me? Like, I don't have time. Oh, who's this person? Like, literally, who's this person? And why is he reaching out to me? And that became something that was passed down throughout the segment, because I don't even know the name. But maybe don't do that. Pick pick
Yeah.
somebody just a little bit ahead of you and reach out. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, well, and that goes back to paying attention, just figuring out the relationships within your department and your segment or what have you, and you start to learn, who's receptive to something like that, or if there's something really, really specific that you're interested in, and you do a meet and greet, because finding a mentor is kind of, yeah, you do want to find one. At the same time, you don't want to necessarily target people or have that expectation because you don't know. So much of the mentorship mentee relationship is chemistry. It's, do you have chemistry with this person? Can you build trust? And I've said this a lot of times, but it's so true. Trust is huge. Yeah, you have to be careful with who you trust anywhere, really, but certainly in a company. You need to learn what people's motivations are and all that kind of stuff. It's just a fact. I'd love to say, yeah, it's going to be glorious, and the first time you work in a major company, everyone just loves everyone, but that's not the case. We're all people.
No.
People are
Yes.
people.
You work with humans.
Yes, and that's great, and it's awful all at the same time. So just be careful. Who the gossip people are after a while. You start to look, who's talking about
Yes.
other people all the time. Okay, I don't trust you. Like,
Yes.
because yeah, oh, they'll go like, oh, between you and me, but you don't know how many others between you and me's there are.
Good point. Yes.
So just be careful with that, but you got to suss it out. You got to feel like, oh my gosh, this person really wants to help me out. Like, you have a meet and greet, you have a great conversation. Maybe you have another coffee. Maybe the next meet and greet is a little bit. They even say, hey, let's do lunch. Oh, awesome. Take them up on that. And then
Mhm.
you're developing a relationship. And after that, it just organically becomes that sort of mentor mentee thing, especially if they're like, hey, look, if you ever have any questions, or if there's things that you're confused about, I'm enjoying our conversations, I'm happy to help. And
Mhm.
once again, just like earlier, don't ask questions every 5 minutes, but you have like, oh my gosh, I'm really struggling with this, my relationship with this person, or I have a project idea, but how to present it. those kinds of things are, if you have a good mentor, man, they're going to guide you in the right direction. Maybe even they know people in your department. They could go, you know what, you need to talk to Tracy because Tracy knows all about this stuff. Oh,
Yes.
great. It's chemistry, it's trust, and you build it. I'm really a careful guy. And again, that goes to my networking skills, because yes, I network, but I always, this sounds awful and I don't mean it to sound awful, but it's just the truth. When I meet people, I do keep somewhat of a wall. Like I keep them at arm's length at the beginning, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what that relationship is going to turn into. We're still learning about each other. It's like friendships, it's like relationships, anything. Sometimes it takes time. You want a mentor right away? Sure, but it doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very true. And I think I could talk to you about 10,000 other topics. But the last point I wanted to touch upon is corporate politics, because those are the unwritten rules and how to navigate those a little bit. What are your tips for people new to their job or just new to the company or team?
Everything that we've talked about already is in relationship to so many things within the work environment. So things like paying attention, not overstepping your bounds immediately. What you said about not overreaching and talking to your VP, even though you're 2 steps above your manager, which is never a good
Mm-hmm.
idea immediately, unless you've created a relationship with that person, and that goes back to networking. So all of those things are in play, but the main thing I think that we've already talked about, but I think is true, is, like you said, the perfect word you said is absorbing the work environment, uh, really paying attention to the motivations that people have within your department. So much of the beginning of your career is just learning what that business is. Yes, you can look
Mm-hmm.
things up on the internet in terms of structure, some goals, but once you're in it, then you really learn stuff. You really learn what the business is about, and your place in it, because that's so
Yes,
important.
your place.
Oh, I can't even begin to, and this goes into a whole other thing, but just in brief, self-awareness is,
Good one.
to me, such a rare thing. But you need to understand your behavior, the effect that
Yes.
you have on others, as much as you're trying to observe everything else that's coming at you. You need to understand who you are in that space. And once you get that down, once you know who you are, everything else, honestly, just is so much easier, because okay, I get who I am and my behavior and what I'm bringing to the table. Now I can kind of understand what my relationships are with other people. Really, that those first couple of 3 months, some people even say like 6 months to a year, is so much of that is just learning, man, about you, about your boss, about your teammates, about your business. um
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and once you start to get that and get into the flow of that, then I tell you, man, things get so much easier later. Don't resist all that stuff, man.
Yes. And a few things that I wanted to add is assess the culture and know, for example, the speed, how they work. You go to certain cultures, and at Disney, I always said change is the only constant because
Yeah.
Disney just kept changing. New teams, new departments, we reorganized, the segments are reforming, you have a new leader. So embrace the change and display flexibility and always reevaluate, can we do things better, faster, more accurate, at least in finance and accounting? Do we need this schedule? Do we need this report? Is there a better way to do things? Then I had friends who were so used to this part of the Disney culture and went to other companies who don't have that. And they were so used to quick, 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 fast, 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 fast. But then they got feedback from their department leader saying, you work too fast. Sorry, you make us look bad. Slow down. Don't submit too fast. Take your time. And my friend was like, what? I have to do what?
Wow.
That's what I'm saying. Like, assess the culture, how they work. Now, if you come from a culture or your speed has been slower and you go somewhere where it's really fast paced, either you have to adjust or that environment just might not work for you. Because the interesting thing about Disney, what I've learned was either people were there for 10, 15, 20, 25, 40 years, or they leave in less than 6 months. I don't know if you observed that, but I've seen
Yeah.
this quite a lot. And it was really a matter of whether the culture fit for them. So it's constant learning. I had other senior executives who were friends of mine who went from Disney to yet another company, and they were saying it's a great company, but it's so slow, and they quit and went back to Disney.
Wow.
And for others who said Disney was too much and they quit and went back to their former companies, both ways. So just that is one part of the culture that's really not spoken about. But if you pay attention, you probably see that. I think if you don't know, for example, dress code when you first started, just ask. When in doubt,
Yep.
always overdress.
Yep.
Up. So the dress code is an important thing. Also, what helped me succeed is be part of the team. Like my very first job at Disney, and I love it because I love to eat. At 10:30 every day, we would be like, "What's for lunch?" So literally, because we're always our joke was always for my first team, you have to be under a certain height and love to eat, otherwise you can't work here. So we got along really well. That was my first department, and they're my friends now. 15 years later, we're still really, really good friends because of what we had in common. So there were a few, of course, they were a bit more quiet, and we would ask them to lunch over and over again, but they just won't come. Whatever the reasons are, they have the right to, of course, you don't have to join, but it just helps you build the team relationship there if you're part of them. So join, build relationships, because a lot of them become your friends, right? Drew mentioned that earlier several times. A lot of people he worked with become his friends, and that's the case with me too. Most of my friends I worked with at some time or another. And it's you spend more time at work than you spend at
Exactly.
home, right?
Exactly.
So really build a good relationship, share a little bit personal. You don't have to go overly personal, but share a little bit about you. I think Drew mentioned a good point about building a wall, because in the beginning you have to be careful what you share with who. But once the trust is there, you have a gut feeling, then there's just be a little bit open-minded and build a relationship, or share a little bit personal, where you live, your family, what you love to eat, travel, whatever that might be, because that really makes a huge difference. And then branch out to other departments and teams, because what I've learned was initially, of course, you spend so much time with your own team. So I only was friends with my own team, but later to expand to others. Those are some of the corporate culture or politics I wanted to talk about. Also, what Drew said earlier about know who the leader is, who the person who knows everything, the person who connects everybody. It's like everybody has their certain roles. And if you observe that, I think it's really helpful for you. So if you know Jane is the one who always puts everybody together to lunch, and she organizes all the lunch meeting, make sure you're her friends so that you're included as well, right? I'm sure there's a lot more about corporate politics we don't have time to cover, but those are some of the entry-level points that you probably should consider.
I actually want to add, you mentioned something about knowing everybody in your team, which we both talked about, but really honestly, learn the hierarchy. And I mean, learn the names, if you can learn the faces, because again, your behavior, you could be, saying something in front of your VP or other executive. And if you don't know who they are, I don't mean to be overcautious, but just learning who these people are. Who's your boss's boss, who reports to who.
Yes.
If you have an online way to kind of look that up,
like an org chart, right? An organization.
Yeah, you can make your own org chart. Disney doesn't really do that, but other companies do. But it's so important to know that and know you're the leader of your company. All of these things are good to know. It's always good to know, because names are going to fly by you. And if you happen to know, like, oh, hey, that's right, that's the executive director over in that department. Okay, good. Now I understand where that works and my workflow and how that interacts with other departments. There's so many things about that help you out, is just knowing the organization. Very important.
Yes, that's a very good point. Their titles, because some companies are more flat, meaning there's fewer leaders and a lot of Indians or worker bees, and there's companies who are very hierarchy oriented and title matters. And some people take their title very serious. I've learned this. Most people are pretty open. I mean, open door policies I've observed have normally been, people have been very good with that. But I've met with some leaders who really know the title, and they're like, well, I'm so-and-so and I don't talk to below this level. So I go through their managers to get my question, and their manager normally goes to them directly. So it's very interesting to observe that.
Yeah, you got to, again, paying attention, but just knowing who these people are, very helpful.
I think we touched upon so many important things. And I really, really appreciate you, Drew, for spending some time with me and really sharing your feedback. And I also like that you've done your homework and reached out to your friends. So that's great to see what their perspectives were, because you came from a human resource perspective. I came from an accounting or department manager leader perspective. So we saw different things, but I think these were our experiences, but I also talked to a lot of people. I love talking to people too. And these were my observations. So thanks again.
Yeah, no, thanks
And
for letting me be on your show there, Vanessa. You're so incredible. You always have been, and I've known you for years now. And you're one of those people that I hold in high regard and a lot of respect
oh, thank
for.
you.
So, thanks for allowing me to share a little bit of my experience. And I learned a bit about you today too, which was great.
Right. That's what I love about this kind of setting, that I get to know you, even though I've known you for years, but from a different angle. When we sit together, we never talk about these specific points that we just covered. I know the other thing you're known for is really your Disney knowledge and everything like that. If any of our listeners, for example, want to follow you, is there a particular area where they can find you?
My Instagram is one word, Point of Drew 2016. So that's my Instagram. You can absolutely feel free to follow me there. What I post is pop culture things because I'm a big collector and I like to go to the parks, celebrations, and all that kind of stuff. So that's basically what I post about. Lately I've had this thing about mugs. Different kinds of mugs. Yeah, I didn't realize how many mugs I had. I do have a Facebook Point of Drew page, which you can add me on to. I haven't been too active on there, but I'm hoping to be more active on there in the near future.
Thank you for sharing your Instagram and Facebook connection with us, Drew. Like I said earlier, I really appreciate the time you spend with us, all the information you shared. I am sure our listeners got a lot out of it. I sure learned something new about you. And to our listeners, hope you really enjoyed the time, just like we enjoyed talking to each other and sharing all the information with you. And just like in the past, if you haven't done so already, feel free to subscribe and add us to your favorite list. And until next time, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day. Bye.